So I'm going to go ahead and get started because I only have 15 minutes. And so first thing is, hi everyone, my name is Sweth, and this is my first YAPC, and one of the lessons I've already learned is when you submit a talk, don't say I can do it anywhere from 15 to 60 minutes if you think that 30 to 45 minutes is the sweet spot, because apparently you get 15 minutes. So that's all I have. That's why I'm diving right in. That's also why I no longer have slides. I had a bunch of slides, got rid of them. This is just basically going to be a live demo with me talking. The other thing is there's a GitHub URL there. This entire playground is up there, so you can pull it down. There's a ton more stuff that I'm not going to be able to get into in this 15 minutes that's in the playground. My name is Sweth, S-W-E-T-H, that and GitHub. So if you want, you can take the picture. Otherwise, I don't have many other repos on there. You'll be able to find this one easily. I'm just going to dive in. I'm talking about Swift 2.2 here from the point of view of someone who had been programming Perl for 20 years on and off, and then the client that I'm working for a couple of months ago pivoted away from Perl and turned me into a Node and JavaScript programmer. And at the same time, the company that I'm consulting to them through said, hey, we're getting a lot of mobile app development requests. Any chance you might want to learn Swift? So I said, well, hell, if I'm throwing all the Perl out the window and learning new things, then I might as well learn another new thing anyway. The other bit of context here, so first of all, only been doing Swift for about 2 months. The other bit of context is, I, in the early 90s, got into Perl and SQL and loved them both. So I never was able to wrap my head around things like C. So if you're like old school C programmers who then got into Perl, a lot of this stuff might seem not as revolutionary to you as it did to me. I'm coming at this from basically a pure Perl point of view when I'm talking about the differences between Perl and Swift. Very, very roughly, conceptually, Swift is like Objective-C with some lessons learned. The basic idea was Apple decided that, actually, quick show of hands, how many people actually know about Swift and what it is? Okay, then I won't go into too much detail. It's an Apple language. Basic idea was all the lessons learned from app development with C and Objective-C. They wanted to try and make it easier. They've open sourced it. They've been coming out with new versions about every year. Right now they're on 2.2, and version 3.0 is in beta. Should be becoming the official one later on this year. And very roughly, what I say here is Swift is to Objective-C as Perl 6 is to Perl 5. There are a lot of ways where that analogy is not true, but the basic idea is attempting to rebuild something that people already have a lot of knowledge in, but maybe make it cleaner and in some ways more powerful or more easy to use. One of the nice things about Swift, that's also one of the horrible things about Swift, is Xcode. That's the IDE that Apple provides for people on Macintosh. And this is something that Xcode also provides as a playground. Basically, the idea is an interactive session where you can develop your code, learn about the code. If you want to learn Swift, I highly recommend, even if you don't like Xcode. Sue was just asking about, can you work in Swift if you don't use Xcode? Yes, you can compile everything. You can actually also build it on Linux and compile it. You can't run Xcode on Linux. I'd suggest when you're first learning, at least for me, it was really helpful on a Mac if you have access to one, download Xcode and play around in the playgrounds. It's really useful for just figuring out a lot of the things about the language. So what I'm going to do here is just go through in this playground and kind of show you a few things that jumped out at me while I was learning Swift. And then that'll probably be about 10 minutes, and maybe we'll have a couple of minutes for Q&A after that. And then I can answer questions. You can email me, or you can just say, screw it, I don't want to learn anything more about Swift, and go on to the next talk. So when you start a playground, when you create a playground for the first time in Xcode, it'll always put those first few lines. Import UIKit is basically just importing some UI libraries, and then it sets a default variable of hello playground, so I'm just leaving that there. One thing, though, I'll note is in this document, if you download this repo later, I have some comments here about things you can find, like rough equivalent of Perl, and I'm probably going to later turn that into a separate, like Rosetta Stone, saying here's how you do this in Swift, here's how you do it in Perl, and vice versa. So those will also end up in the repo, but right now they're just all inline in here. And then there's a lot of stuff I have here discussing the right side of the screen is not showing up here. Why is it? Oh, it is showing up, it's just the contrast is horrible. In the actual screen, the right side here is a separate color and a separate column. It's a different gray. but I guess they're all, you all can't see a different color here on the right side, can you? So one of the things I explain here is on the right, there is a results area. So as you type it, any sort of code in the editor, it actually evaluates it and gives you the results on the right side. So I'm going to scroll down, actually, up here. We set the value string to hello playground, and it actually evaluates it. A couple of cool things they have is they have a results view that you can add, which actually shows you the contents inline. If it's an image, it'll actually show you the image. Say if you're loading an image into a variable, you'll actually see a preview of the image. If it's a loop variable, it'll actually show you the last time, the last value that it had. Or if it's something that's iterating across, you can actually say show the results history. It'll show you each of the values or a graph of the values. There's some examples of that later on that I'll show. So that's really useful. And then there's also a little eyeball here, which gives you a quick look preview, which again, depending on what type of thing you're looking at, can be potentially more useful than just the string representation. Whatever's on the right hand here in the results section is always the, Apple describes as the textual representation of whatever that line evaluates to. Also, apologies, it occurs to me I'm originally from the East Coast of the United States. I tend to talk fast by default, and I've got not that much time. If I'm talking too fast, wave at me, make me slow down. So first conceptual difference that every person I've talked to who's mostly a Perl person dealing with a language like this deals with is Swift is very strongly typed. Everything has to be typed, and let me get to the first code examples I can just show you. One of the things is everything has to be typed, and everything has to be either a constant or a variable. So rather than saying my $ variable string equals something, you say var variable string equals this is a variable, or you actually have to define it as a constant. If you're familiar with the const fast module, it's roughly equivalent to using that to define a constant. As a matter of style, from what I've seen, and I think this is something that Swift inherited from some other languages like Haskell, Swift programmers seem to create things as a constant by default, and then when they need to change them, then they go back and change the let declaration to a var. It actually turns out to be kind of a safer way of doing it, although once you have done it for a while, you get a feeling for which things need to be a var and which ones don't. But just as a Perl person, we declare everything as a variable, and then go back and do a constant declaration at the top at the end of the process. At least that's how I do it. A couple of things to note. Again, Xcode is really good about giving you information. Anything that has a double slash at the beginning of the line in this playground is something that I know will generate an error. And so I've commented out, but that way you can go in later, uncomment them, and see what the errors are, see how Xcode helps you try and solve it. For example, earlier I declare this constant string, let constant string, so it's a constant declaration. If I uncomment this line where I'm redeclaring it, Xcode will think for a moment and then give me an error. I can click on it and say cannot assign to value constant string as a let. Also, you'll notice it's very tiny here, but it gives you the same error as a pop-up and says fix it. You want to change that let up above to a var to make it mutable. I could do that. I could just click yes. And now, if you see up here, that let became a var. So it'll actually help you fix your code. Sometimes those fixes are the right fixes, sometimes they're not, but it's useful when you're learning to figure out, oh, this is one way to potentially solve that problem. Another nice, well, not a nice thing, but I guess just a way that I found useful in learning is, sorry, I just got confused about where I was in this presentation. This is redeclaring a variable. It's the equivalent of doing like a myvar and then a myvar again. It'll give you a little error there. Sorry, I'm already almost out of time. 15 minutes is very short. You know what? Sorry? Oh, okay, I'm at half. Looked like 10 minutes to me, but you're the timekeeper, so I've got an extra 2 minutes. I'll keep going. They've got then primitive types. Everything is typed. In addition to being a variable or a constant, everything has to be declared as, it can be a Boolean, a string, an int, a float, a double. There's some examples in here of things that often I've seen in other contexts throw Perl programmers for a loop, like not understanding how int and double math work, just because normally Perl does what we mean. And actually that, I guess, would be one of the other big lessons for Perl programmers getting into Swift is, for the most part, Swift never does what you mean. It makes you say exactly what you mean. So a lot of things that you assume will happen don't. There's no, other than when you initially assign a variable or a constant, there's no implicit type conversion. So let me find an example of that. Yeah, here. I've explicitly set this variable to be a string, and if you try and then assign 1, it doesn't coerce that 1 into the string representation of 1. Instead, it gives you an error. Another difference between Perl and Swift is, in Swift, everything is an object that has methods that you can call. And they also, all parameters in Swift have to be defined unless you explicitly set them as optional. So you can give it a value of empty, but you cannot, there's something here that I do not want, and I don't know how to make that vanish. Oh, well, this is the inline view, just so you can see. Sorry. I'll just scroll past that for now. Sorry, this time constraint is worse than I thought it was going to be on my ability to focus. Nils and optionals. That's what I was talking about. In Swift, everything has to have a value. You can't have something that is initialized without a value. So nil is the way you represent no value in Swift, but it's not something you can actually initialize it as. You actually have to give it, for example, an empty string. You can declare optionals by putting a question mark after something that says it can either have a value or not, but then if you declare a parameter as optional, you actually have to unroll it when you're using it. You have to tell the function that's calling it that, yes, there is an optional value here, or you have to explicit. Essentially, it's like untainting in, for those who dealt with taint back in the day when people used that regularly. Another cool thing about Xcode, again, it's one of the good ways to learn about things, is you can actually option click or command click on parameters. Here, for example, let me command click. This is supposed to, there. If you command click on a parameter in Xcode, it'll actually take you back to where it was originally defined. And then you can actually go in and do things like edit all in scope. This is actually one feature that I really like is, let's say you're refactoring, you've named a parameter, and you then decide, oh, that's a horrible name for that parameter. I want to go back and change it. You can change it here, and it actually changes it everywhere that it is defined. So earlier I had assigned down here that value. That's now also changed to Bob when I change it above. So because of the fact that everything is strongly typed and you have a development environment that can actually parse things very well while you're just writing out the code, it can figure out every instance of that same parameter and edit it for you. Clearly, I'm doing a bad job at going through my very long list of things that I'd want to talk about, and I'm getting the 3-minute sign. So I'll just go to Q&A. Any questions? No. Yeah. It depends on what you mean by feel comfortable. I've been doing it for about 2 months. I can get basic stuff going. I will say I still hate regular expressions in Swift. They are not, to me, intuitive or easy at all. So every time I try and solve a problem that needs regexes, I then just say screw it and go back to Perl. Things like building UIs, actually, I've done a little bit of that, built a couple of just kind of demo apps. That took, honestly, about 2 or 3 weeks of just kind of poking around to get comfortable with. I think if in about another 3 or 4 months, I would be willing to say, yes, I feel comfortable. Right now, I think I'm still very much in the learning stages. Any other questions? Yeah. What's next? Well, there's flow control. There's many other things. You know what? Okay. One nice thing here, for example, here's another one of the preview modes that, sorry, what was that? Yes, it's a clown shoe as an image. You have resources that you can easily add to a project, and when you do, it'll actually show you if it has some way of rendering that object. It'll actually show it to you inline. So I assigned this image named clown shoe, meaning it's referring to that resource that the UI kit has imported to this variable. It'll actually show you the preview inline. In terms of flow control, things like that, defining functions, that's mostly the same as in Perl on the flow control side. It does have a switch statement that's actually pretty nice. One of the nice things about it is you can compare anything to anything else as long as you do the proper type coercions, and everything is an object. So it's not just a list of values that something has to match. What else for the what's next question? Sorry, yeah? Yeah, so one thing that's really frustrating, the question was, does it understand the concept of generics? You can define generic functions. When you define a function, you have to say these are the types that it gets, but a lot of times, that it takes as arguments, rather. A lot of times that becomes a pain because you'll have to then define 5 different functions that are almost identical, but one operates on strings, one operates on integers. Instead, you can also define generic functions where you say, here's the general model of how I deal with things, and then if you get a string, this is how you deal with it. If you get an integer, this is how you deal with it. So it does have that ability. Did that answer? Lists and arrays, no, you cannot, at least as far as I know. That is another big difference that has burned a lot of folks I've been talking to who've gone from Perl to Swift. All of your parameters have to be typed. That includes containers. So sets, arrays, enums, all of those you have to explicitly state this is the type of parameter that can appear in this container. And if you then have an array of integers, you can't actually stick strings in there, and I've yet to figure out a way to do a generic array where you can just stick whatever you want in there. Does that answer the question? Okay. Here was an example of the inline. Can you all see those dots? They're kind of grayed out. It's evaluating the loop and just showing you the graphical representation of what's happening to that value. That's useful sometimes when debugging, I found. Another thing to note here is that I am talking here about Swift 2. This is a fairly rapidly changing language, so Swift 3 is coming out relatively soon. There are a couple of ways that it is not backwards compatible with Swift 2. And one of the nice things is that they've actually put into the debugger all of the knowledge about the things that will be incompatible in the next version. So as you're programming in Swift 2 and you use those constructs, it'll have you actually give you a warning here saying, for example, the C-style for statement is deprecated and will be removed in a future version. So as you're going through, you can learn about future versions that way. As I said before, functions in Swift have to have the type of each argument defined. And by default, the first argument to a multi-argument function is unnamed. Every other argument has to be named. So, for example, you have to name all of the arguments when you're defining the function. When you call them, the first one is unnamed. Everything after that has to be named. So for example, there's this repeat string n times. I've defined the 2 arguments are a string and an integer, the string to repeat, the number of times to repeat it. I have to invoke it as with the string, but then the number of times to repeat, I actually have to give a label to it. I can't just say repeat string n times foo and for. There are ways then that you can say the names are optional in the function definition, but they want to encourage best practices, and they believe that a best practice is that you don't use positional parameters. You should name your parameters as you're passing them in. What was that? Yes. When you are calling it, you have to name everything internally for reference, but when you're calling it, you have to not give a name for the first argument, although there is a way that you can define the function so that it will accept a name for the first argument. So if you want to have everything named when you pass it in, you can do that. And now I'm slowing down, no longer feeling like I'm rushed, because according to my clock, I'm over time. I guess, are there any other questions? Yeah? Sorry, what was that? Variable number of arguments to a function. Where's my example of this? No. Yes, everything is an object. So containers are objects as well, and any object is a valid argument. So if you want to pass in multiple arguments just via a hash, you can definitely do that. Not quite. Yeah, the syntax is different, but yes. Let me go up to. Yeah, the short answer is yes. You can definitely pass in. Yes, I just can't find the example of the dictionary. But essentially, yes, it's you just define with. Let me find the array. So yeah, with arrays you do the square brackets. With dictionaries, you actually have to give a slight bit of syntactic sugar to tell it that it's a dictionary, but then you just put in whatever the contents are, and you can pass it around as an object, as an argument to anything. Well, no, I think he was thinking about variable number of arguments. You can do variable number as well. Essentially, there's an underscore argument operator that you can give in the definition of a function, and you can use that and one other, I don't remember offhand what the, actually it might be the triple dot operator, which is their version of the range. Yes, yes. So yes, you were correct then, to say any other number of positional parameters here. Yeah, you had a question? In what sense? Yes, yes, yes. And also they have very nice closures, so you can pass functions around as you need. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, yes. You can't run Xcode on Linux, but you can compile the code and run the code on Linux and OS X and iOS. I've been told that there is a Windows version and an Android version that are in the works, but no one will confirm when those will be released. Oh, okay, all right, thank you. Bye.